now and then I get a little bit lonely and you're never coming around.
Turn around.
Every now and then I get a little bit tired of listening to the sound of my tears.
Turn around.
Every now and then I get a little bit nervous that the best of all the years have gone by.
Turn around.
Every now and then I get a little bit terrified, and then I see the look in your eyes.
Turn around, bright eyes.
Every now and then I fall
Turn
apart.
around, bright eyes.
Every now and then I fall apart, and I need you now tonight, and I need you more than ever. And if you only hold me tight, we'll be holding on forever, and we'll only be making it right, 'cause we'll never be wrong. Together we can take it to the end of the line. The love is like a shadow on me all of the time. I don't know what to do and I'm always in the dark. We're living in a powder keg and giving off balls. I really need you tonight. Forever's gonna start tonight.
Forever's gonna start tonight.
Upon a time I was falling in love, but now I'm only falling apart. There's nothing I can do, a total eclipse of the heart. Once upon a time there was light in my life, but now there's only love in the dark. Nothing I can say, a total eclipse of the heart. Every now and then I fall apart. Every now and then I fall apart, and I need you now tonight, and I need you more than ever. And if you only hold me tight, we'll be holding on forever, and we'll only be making it right, 'cause we'll never be wrong. Together we can take it to the end of the line. Love is like a shadow on me all of the time. I don't know what to do, I'm always in the dark. We're living in a powder keg and giving off sparks. I really need you tonight. Forever's gonna start tonight. Forever's gonna start tonight. Once upon a time I was falling in love, but now I'm only falling apart. Nothing I can say, a total eclipse of the heart. A total eclipse of the heart. A total eclipse of the heart.
Okay, so it's a pretty good conspiratorial background there. It's time to get into the astrology stuff. Let's get serious here. So we're going to have to be a bit technical to start with, because we have to start with the astrology of eclipses. So that's what we're dealing with here. So Trump was born right smack bang in the middle of a total lunar eclipse. So we need to talk about what that means in an astrological sense. So have a birth chart, and the planets all go around in the same way unless they retrograde. So they're all sort of going around the Zodiac, which is represented in a 2D manner on a birth chart. So the moon is the fastest moving planet and it basically does 12 rotations of the birth chart of the ecliptic, of the zodiacal ring above us in the sky. So the moon does 12 rotations in the same time that the sun takes to do one, which is why we have 12 months in a year. And so essentially 12 times during the year, the moon will exactly meet or conjunct the sun in the sky and on a birth chart. Well, on a birth chart, but not necessarily the sky. And that's the trick about an eclipse. So while on a 2D birth chart, it will look like we have 12 exact conjunctions between the sun and the moon a year. It's not actually the case, because if we did, we'd have 12 solar eclipses. So solar eclipses are new moons, and new moons are conjunctions. So when the sun and the moon meet. But we don't, because the sun is very stable, so it sort of goes like that, very stable, whereas the moon rotates and sort of goes up and down like that. So it goes above and below the trajectory of the sun. So they can meet in 2D, but not in 3D, that the moon will actually be significantly above or below the sun on the ecliptic. So there's no eclipse. So what makes an eclipse is when the 3D stuff lines up and when the moon is on the same plane as the sun.
The moon catches up with the sun, and the moon basically gets, because the sun is the light giver, it's the male energy, the moon is the female energy. It's like the sperm, the sun is the biggest sperm, and the egg. So they connect together, new impulse is given, this is new moon. But every so often, most of the times they come together, but they're not on the same ecliptic exactly, because the moon can move a bit higher, lower, so they'll pass like that, These are the normal new moons. But when it's a solar eclipse, the moon passes exactly over. There is full moon every month. That's when the sun and the moon are opposite each other. My head is the earth, so they're looking at each other, the sun, so you see full moon. For flat earthers, I have another theory, but with working with a globe earth. But once per year or twice per year, we have eclipses, lunar eclipses twice per year. It happens that, again, the moon is exactly on the same ecliptic as the earth and the sun. So the earth hides the shadow throws a shadow on the moon. So that's when we get these blood moons and they look like the moon is darkened.
And that's tricky to show in 2D, isn't it? So that's why we have, from an astrological sense, that's why we have two extra characters in the celestial drama that is a birth chart, which are the north and south nodes of the moon, which are symbolised by little headphones. So the north node is the upright headphones and the south node is the upside down headphones. And they're called Rahu and Ketu respectively. So Rahu is the north node, ascending, south node is the descending node, Ketu. Oh, nice. And so you see them sort of floating very slowly. They circle the chart in the opposite way, in the opposite direction that the other planets do. And they're always on an axis, so the north and south node of the moon are always opposite each other on the chart. So they form a sort of central axis along our chart, which a lot of astrologers believe, which I tend to as well, that that's a underlying fundamental life path that we're on. So across the chart, from the position, from the house of the south node Ketu to the house of the north node Rahu, that sort of defines this fundamental trajectory linked to sort of things like karma and reincarnation and past lives that we take in with us for this incarnation, I guess.
I feel like the nodes are the most important part of astrology in general. They do essentially represent our life path and a lot of the choices that we can make along the life journey that helps us align to that path consciously. And all in all, just helps us bring more balance and harmony into our life. It really is very important in that free will side to things, because no matter what's going on in the astrology, or in our life or whatever, there is always this undercurrent to the nodes that as we become aware of how to work with, it really helps tremendously with bringing balance to that area.
So basically, in terms of eclipses, when the nodes conjunct the sun and the moon, that shows that the sun and the moon are also lining up with each other. So for a full moon, when the sun and the moon oppose each other, when the moon lines up with the south node or the north node and vice versa with the sun, you'll get a proper lunar eclipse. Whereas for a conjunction, when the sun and the moon both conjunct one of the nodes, you'll get a new moon or a solar eclipse, because the moon is between the sun and the earth. Cool. So that's the basics of how, now that we got that sort of technical side out of the way, we can move on to some of the more exciting stuff about the astrology of eclipses. So with a normal opposition between two planets, they essentially they exist on a polarity to each other. So they're not at each other or clashing or conflicting like a square, like 90 degrees planets are, but they're opposite ends of a polarity. And in astrology, the aim is to properly balance each side of your main opposition, so that you don't unconsciously or unhealthily express the side that you're not given enough time to. So with a full moon / a lunar eclipse, when the sun and moon are opposite, it indicates a polarity between the inner and outer personality. So moon being inner, sun outer. You can call it sort of nighttime personality versus daytime personality, introverted versus extroverted, more active versus active / even masculine versus receptive and feminine sort of idea. Moon emotions, sun mainly inspiration and action. So anyone born on a full moon will have that polarity between those two fundamental sides of their personality. With an eclipse, when you then have the nodes, so with a example of a lunar eclipse, you have that opposition, but you also have the nodes. So the nodes essentially serve to amplify that polarity. They make it more intense. So the south node so the south nodes sort of our past or our baggage. It's what we sort of bring in with us and what we're moving away from. So it can be our foundations, our comfort zone, but also where we can be stuck and sort of held back. And so K2 conjunct a planet sort of reduces, distorts, holds back the energy of that planet. Everyone will have different interpretations. That's sort of how I see it. Whereas like Rahu will intensify or give extra energy or amplification, even to some extent radicalization to that planet. So being born on an eclipse, as an example of a full moon, is like an intense example of that same astrological polarity that exists. And so that's the context, I guess, for why eclipses have been seen as sort of omens, usually bad omens in history.
So eclipses traditionally, especially in ancient times, used to be viewed, oftentimes, not always, but there was a tendency to view them as negative omens, because part of what happens is that eclipses are something that from a visual standpoint or from just an observational standpoint appear to interrupt the order or the flow of nature in some sense. Because what will happen with an eclipse like this, a solar eclipse that occurs in the middle of the day, is that everybody will be going along and living their life and doing things normally, and then suddenly right in the middle of the day it'll turn completely dark, as if the nighttime, as if suddenly it's become night out, even though it's still the middle of the day. And there's something that's, from a symbolic standpoint, that can be tremendously sort of unnerving about that experience, the experience of day basically turning to night suddenly for a brief period of time. So there was a tendency in ancient times to view eclipses, especially from a mundane standpoint, as negative omens that indicated major changes or major shifts in different parts of the world, which could include somewhat extreme things like famine or plagues or wars or the death of kings and other things like that.
And there's a very compelling list of world events that have occurred during eclipses. Ancient, so obviously, if you look at the Bible, a lot of imagery that says Jesus was crucified during an eclipse. So the fall of Constantinople during an eclipse, when Napoleon lost his final battle, Waterloo was it? Eclipse. Titanic sunk during an eclipse season. Got a bunch. There are definitely a bunch more. Even more recent examples. So the start of the COVID, the Rona pandemic. I assume it was actually completely unscripted. Rolled out, so end of 2019, start 2020, over an eclipse season, like perfectly lined up. How the timing of the pandemic perfectly aligned with that eclipse season. Like Bitcoin highs, really closely linked to eclipses, and then the FTX crash last year, eclipse, and then this year, 2023, the current Israel versus Hamas war kicked off just for an eclipse season, and then basically heightened during the eclipse season. That also, on a side note, that war kicked off October 7, exactly 50 years after the Yom Kippur war. So, and both of those were essentially the month after the end of a Jubilee year, so that 50-year cycle. So exactly 50 years, exactly one Jubilee between the start of those wars. Probably just a coincidence. So the reason Israel and Hamas is an interesting example, because Netanyahu, Bibi, lover of war crimes, he was born on an eclipse as well, and his eclipse point, the eclipse point in his chart lines up with where the eclipse was on when the Hamas war against Hamas started. And you see a lot of these synchronicities in people's charts born on eclipses, which then get activated by an eclipse. And so definitely watch out for next year when we have what's called the Great American Eclipse. Could be Orange Moonchild related. before we go on, the royal family are a great example as well. They fucking love an eclipse to the royals on the Nolly. So Prince Charles was born on an eclipse, Prince William, eclipse, even Kate, who they famously got to dress up as Rosemary's Baby when she showed off her firstborn. Poor thing, get involved with those creeps. So Kate Middleton was born on an eclipse. But then so Charles and Diane were married on an eclipse. Diana's biography about things that were going on behind the scenes came out on an eclipse, and 6 months later, again the next eclipse season, they broke up. Diana died, unfortunately, I think maybe 2 days after the eclipse, and Chuck, our new benevolent Commonwealth ruler, was coronated on an eclipse as well. Don't do that. Looking a bit orange. Right, let's get to the top. We'll get the best view. Alright, so why would, let's say, they were trying to bring the Moonchild in for this particular eclipse, why would they have chosen this eclipse? So firstly, it was as I said, a total lunar eclipse. So basically perfect, you can see on the birth chart, almost perfect alignment between the nodes and the Sun-Moon opposition. So the moon would have been almost completely obscured in the sky. That's important for later on. And so that's what a blood moon is. It's when the entire moon is eclipsed, and it's supposed to be the most ominous or the most foreboding type of eclipse. So you got that symbology sort of wrapped into it, and that sort of redness as well, which we'll also get back to. So that's one thing. Astrologically, so looking at Vedic astrology, they have a term called Kala Sarpa Yoga, and it's basically when all the planets are on one side of that nodal axis, so that axis on the chart between the north and south node, when all the planets are on one side of that, it indicates a extreme personality, all or nothing, larger than life.
Now, this particular kind of placement of the nodes in a chart where all the planets are between the nodes, you see all of them are on one side, this is called a Kala Sarpa Yoga. Now, the Kala Sarpa Yoga in a chart is very important because it makes a person, it does make them very successful, but here's the thing, it's an intense and extreme life. Things are like either 100 or it's a 0. There's no middle ground with these people, right? So there are times in life when they hit rock bottom, they are really low, but then if they have the Kala Sarpa Yoga, they rise even higher than before, like they bounce, right? There's this kind of, they go very low, but then when they do rise, they're in a much better position than when they were earlier. So Kala Sarpa Yoga brings these big swinging extremes in a person's life.
So you sort of see that eclipse coming up, you're like, oh, okay, this should be a big one. We just need to know if this stuff actually happened in the world on that eclipse as well. So that's another one. And then if you sort of start to get more into the astrology, without even going too deep, just basic, not even sort of narrowing down to tropical versus sidereal or whatever, just looking at the planets and their aspects, you see like they just hit all these crunch points, sort of key conjunctions between the major inner planets, and then this really sort of full-on square, like 190-degree square, and you sort of see these aspects taking place for that full moon. You start to see why you would target this particular eclipse. So what I want to do now is, as we sort of reach our first little plateau, I'm going to walk you through five celestial archetypes from Trump's chart, from the astrology of this eclipse, and show how they form the basis of the Orange Moonchild, of the character, of the personality of the Orange Moonchild.